This is the Louie T Network. You are now officially in the lab room. It's that time again. It's that time again to go hard in the off season, cause we trying to win. We gon' go so hard, we don't take no days off. Hopefully one day it's all gonna pay off.
Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to the 2017 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series, where your man Louie T aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2017 NFL Draft using our baseball grading scale: single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts in the Draft Wrap-Up Series, as we cannot tell how these players are going to pan out, and I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so we'll get a grade for each and every single player selected in X said team's draft. We'll combine those grades, divide by the number of picks, apply bonuses when necessary, which will then yield us an overall score and grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series picked by you. That's right. You, the viewer out there at home, are in total control, as this is the You Pick format, or as I like to call it, the Up format. Simply be the first to leave a comment in the comment section of this and future videos in this series stating two things: the team you'd like to see next and the phrase next. It's really simple. I'll give you a couple of examples. Colts next, Colts. Indianapolis Colts next, Indianapolis next. You get the drift, you get the picture. Be as efficient and as quick as possible, because these entries are coming in lightning quick. Speaking of which, you guys have spoken. The next team up in the series is none other than the Indianapolis Colts. This is a team that over the last couple of years I've been really disappointed in, because I look at the Colts and they've got one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and he can't stay healthy because they refuse to protect him with an adequate offensive line. Their GM really was a source of frustration for me and probably most Indianapolis Colts fans. Finally, Jim Irsay, the owner of the Indianapolis Colts, realized that he had to part ways with the GM that was really pulling this organization down, and they instead bring in a new GM in Chris Ballard. And right away, you can feel the impact, and this just feels different in Indy right now. A lot of people wanted to see Chuck Pagano, the head coach, ousted as well. They decided to hold on and retain his services. But now you're getting a new GM in there, and now you're starting to feel like, okay, maybe they got a shot to turn everything around, because again, all the pieces are in place. Big time wide receiver, big time quarterback, everything you need now. And I'm telling you right now, just at first blush, just looking at this Colts draft from afar, it was one of my favorite drafts. As I dove into the draft, however, there were a couple of picks that I wasn't too fond of. But if you're talking about the initial first 4 or 5 picks of a draft, I don't know if there are any teams out there who did it much better than this Indianapolis Colts football team. I mean, they really enhanced their team. I will say this much: if you're talking about enhancing your football team, not just for the future, but I'm talking about in the here and now, in the present, I don't know if there's a team out there that made their team that much more better than this Indianapolis Colts team. That's how good of a job their new GM, Chris Ballard, did at getting players that fit needs, that also were among the most talented at their respective positions in this draft. And I think it's a Colts team that is going to be very competitive, one that I think can easily take hold of a very, very up for grabs AFC South division. Let's look at their 2017 NFL draft and talk about these players that I'm really excited about for this Indianapolis Colts team. We start in the first round. 15th overall selection, the Ohio State University safety Malik Hooker is the pick. This was a guy that we were talking about potentially going off the board as early as 5. His name was really swirling around. Would the Bears take him at 2? I mean, it was amazing. Or excuse me, the Bears were at 3. And we were talking about all these teams. Would the 49ers take him at 2? I mean, he wasn't getting past the Chargers at 7, right? wrong. He falls all the way to 15 to the Colts, and I can't think of a better spot for this guy to land. 6'1", 206 pounds is where we start. His size is tremendous for the safety position. Again, the receivers in this league, the tight ends in this league, they're getting bigger, they're getting stronger, they're getting faster. You got to have big, long, athletic guys to keep up with them. Speaking of which, athleticism and instincts are the next two pros for Malik Hooker. This guy's athleticism, we feel like is solid. I don't think it's off the charts like, say, the safety out of LSU, who we saw run, okay? We didn't get to see Malik Hooker do anything after the season was over. He elected to have surgery on his shoulder, so we weren't able to see him work out and run. I didn't think he was gonna tear it up necessarily and run a 4.41 or anything of that sort. He may have run a 4.48. He may have run a 4.52, which would have been fine because his instincts, if he's lacking in that elite top end speed department, which I don't think is the case. I think he would have run a sub 4.5 40, but even if he didn't, his instincts make up for any deficiency that he may have with speed, because this guy's instincts is off the charts. He does a great job of keying quarterbacks' eyes, does a great job of allowing the quarterback and route combinations to take him to the football. He trusts his eyes and he makes quick and very swift decisions that take him straight to the football and allow him to make plays. So his athleticism and his instincts are A1. They're top notch, and they help him make the plays that we saw him make on a consistent basis while at Ohio State in 2016. You go to his next pro, physicality. We talked about him and his lack of tackling ability, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But there's no mistaking that this guy will come up and hit you. He's not afraid to stick his helmet in there, get in the fray, and get a little dirty. So let's dispel the notion right now, because a lot of times I think people like to associate people that don't tackle well or miss a lot of tackles with guys who aren't physical. That's not the case, especially in this case. Sometimes you got guys that miss a lot of tackles because they're overly physical and they want to come up and they want to hit you and they want to have the big shot. He's one of those guys that's coming up to light you up, but he's also a guy that is physical and will get you down on the ground. So we'll talk about his tackling ability, lack thereof, and what's the cause for it a little bit later on. But just know that this guy is physical. He's a complete safety, and I think the Colts got themselves a really good football player here. Comfortable in space. This is an ex-basketball player. He moves very fluidly out on the football field. You can tell that he's an athlete, that he played multiple sports. He just looks comfortable on the football field. His back pedal is smooth. His transition from back pedal to sprint it's even more it's just silky smooth. He's a guy that, again, doesn't waste a lot of motion out on the football field, which again helps him get to the football that much quicker to make plays on it. Angles and routes to the football are exceptional. That's the next pro. I mean, the one play that comes to mind is in the national championship, or the playoff game, excuse me, because they got destroyed by Clemson in the playoffs. But there was a pick early in that game, Deshaun Watson going up top to Renfro, a guy that hurt them or hurt the Alabama Crimson Tide in the playoffs the year before with some deep balls. Malik Hooker did his homework, was over the top, took a beautiful angle to the football, made up a ton of ground, and it was because he took such an efficient angle, was able to get to a throw that had to be every bit of 45, 50 yards down the field, catch it in the end zone, pick it off, turnover forced by the Buckeyes and Malik Hooker. So, I mean, it's those types of plays where you see the range and you see this guy take those angles to the football and you just say, wow, they're breathtaking. And if this guy can do this on a consistent basis, he's going to be a problem for NFL quarterbacks because he does a really good job of disguising pre-snap what he's doing. I mean, as the quarterback is trying to really read the field and kind of get pre-snap keys, this guy's up hovering around the line of scrimmage. You're counting him as an in-box defender. Next thing you know, you snap the football and this guy's 25 yards away from the line of scrimmage. You're thinking you got one-on-one on the outside. Next thing you know, he's bailing all the way to the outer numbers and he's going and getting the football. So does a phenomenal job of disguising his coverages, and he's a guy that takes great angles to the football, which is why he ended up with the ball production that he had in 2016. Speaking of which, tremendous ball skills. This is a guy that had 7 INTs in 2016. Just tremendous ball production. And when you watch him and you watch the plays that he made, these weren't tip drill picks. These weren't picks where he was just Johnny on the spot, right place, right time. One of his teammates tips the football in the air and he's the beneficiary of it. This guy was going and getting the football. He was going up at the highest point and snatching the football out of the air. He was going and making plays 30, 40, 50 yards away from the line of scrimmage. He was going and getting the football. These weren't gimmies. This was a guy going out and taking the football away from the opposition. Versatility, I think this guy can play free safety. Obviously, I think he is probably the best free safety in terms of range in this draft. He can also come up and play strong safety. I think people have given him a bad rap because he missed some tackles. And yes, he does miss tackles. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I think that's something that can be cleaned up. I don't think it's a deficiency that is something that you just have to take with Malik Hooker. I think he can clean that up and get even better at that. He gives you some slot ability. He can play over the slot. Very fluid in space, like I said already. So he's a guy that definitely can drop over the slot, play some tight ends and receivers. And also, he's a guy that blitzes around the line of scrimmage very effectively, whether you're talking run blitz or going after the quarterback. He does both of them equally as well. And I was really pleased with his blitzing ability. I was actually taken aback because, again, I wasn't expecting much from him by way of being up around the line of scrimmage because of all the things that I had heard about his erroneous tackling ability. But this guy was exceptional. When he would blitz, he's the type of guy that will blitz off of the right side of the formation, and they will, of course, he'll be unblocked because they're running to the left side of the formation, and he'll come all the way around and make the tackle from behind. He's very, very good as a blitzer, times them up well, and is extremely fast, closes the distance between he and the ball carrier when he is untouched. And finally, keys quarterback's eyes extremely well. Again, I think he's one of the best in the draft at doing this at the safety position, which is what led him to the 7 interceptions that he was able to obtain in 2016. No one in this draft at the safety position keys quarterback's eyes, uses those keys to take them to the football and then make plays on the football, all in conjunction with each other, like Malik Hooker does, which is what sets him apart from many of the safeties in this draft. You go from his pros to his cons. Takes poor angles and misses tackles. I think the biggest reason for his missed tackles is that he takes poor angles. All right, I think there's a misnomer that this guy is just a poor tackler. I just think he takes poor angles. You look at the run that they gave up in the Wisconsin game on that Saturday night. They gave up a huge run in that game to Corey Clement, and he should have been tackled at least 2 or 3 times on that particular play. And if you look at that play, Malik Hooker had an opportunity to get him, took a really poor angle, should have been at worst escorting him out of bounds. Instead, he was diving at his legs because he took a poor angle. You watch him in some other games and he takes poor angles to the football. And sometimes he doesn't come under control because he's one of those guys that likes to come downhill very aggressively, and he'll take bad angles to make it worse. And it's so easy to make a guy miss if he's coming downhill with extreme speed and he doesn't take the proper angle. And Malik Hooker, to me, is a very, very big victim of taking poor angles. If he just cleans up his pursuit angles, and much like he does in passing situations where he takes beautiful angles to the football, if he would do the same as a tackler, I think he'd be fine and he'd make a lot more tackles, because you see this guy getting people on the ground. When he squares up, when he takes proper angles, he's generally getting guys on the ground. It's when he takes sloppy and poor angles to the football, that's when you're seeing a lot of these missed tackles. And finally, the last con is he's an infant at the position. Now, you could look at this one of 2 ways. And again, I always say this. You can either say it's upside or you can say he's raw. It's a little bit of both. This is a guy that in high school only played football for 2 years. This guy was a big-time basketball player, and he realized very quickly at 6'1", The only place I'm going is home if I think I'm going to be a professional basketball player. And so, you know, a lot of these guys realize very quickly, yeah, I love the game of basketball, but I'm not big enough. I'm not this enough. I got a better shot at being a football player, which, as we saw with Malik Hooker, was the right decision. And so only 2 years of football at the high school level. He goes to Ohio State. And because they're so loaded, he's got to sit behind guys like Von Bell. He plays sparingly in 2014. He redshirts a year, and then all of a sudden he gets an opportunity in 2016. So you're talking about 2014 redshirting, 2015 playing sparingly, and then 2016 as a redshirt sophomore getting in the action and going out and balling to the point where you're a top 15 pick in the 2017 NFL draft. So this guy's really young. He's really raw. And you're talking about a guy that has a lot to learn about football in general and the safety position as a whole. So this is a guy that I think has a lot more molding to take place in his game. And you got to be excited about that if you're an Indianapolis Colts fan, because the best of Malik Hooker is yet to come. So Colts fans should be excited about that. I think the staff and Chris Ballard and all of that Colts organization is really excited with this selection. And this is a guy that I think can come in and really help change the fortunes of this Indianapolis Colts defense, along with some of the other selections made in this draft. In the first round, 15th overall selection, Ohio State safety Malik Hooker. Is it up? He's hit deep. You can put him on the board. Yeah. It's a home run for the Indianapolis Colts as they get one of the premier safeties in this draft, along with Jamal Adams, Malik Hooker. They were the best two safeties in this draft. And Hooker, bar none, best ball skills of any safety. Hell, I'd even take it a step further and say any cornerback, any defensive back in this draft, and the Colts are getting this guy in the first round. You go to their second round pick, 46th overall, Florida cornerback Quincy Wilson is the selection. Here's another guy that I feel like is going to come in and have an opportunity to make an immediate impact on this Colts defense. And that's why I feel like of all the teams that I've covered thus far in their drafts, this is the one team that I look at and say these guys that they selected have a chance to step in and have an immediate impact and really upgrade a Colts team that I think is on the cusp of doing some really good things in that AFC South division. And these are the types of guys that they need to come in and help them clean up some things defensively. I remember last year very vividly at just how decimated the Colts were at the cornerback position. Hell, if I went out to Indy and tried out at the beginning of the season, I probably could have gotten a spot out there at cornerback. They were so banged up. They were dealing with a myriad of injuries. And they paid for it. Teams like Detroit were putting up big numbers on them early in the season. And it was due to injuries. And so this was a position of need for the Indianapolis Colts. And this is a guy that can come in and help you. Let's talk about him. 6'1", 211 pounds, size and length. 32-inch arms to go with that 6'1" frame for Quincy Wilson. I love his game. I love the way he approaches the cornerback position. I love his swag. He's one of those guys that is easy to really like his game and like his attitude and approach to football. His athleticism is solid. It's not great. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but it's got good enough. Again, when you're 6'1", 32-inch arms, and you've got a long wingspan, you don't have to be the best athlete in the world. You just got to be a solid athlete, and that's exactly what Quincy Wilson is. If he was a great athlete at 6'1", he would be in the first round. But instead, he's a second round pick, and a lot of that probably has to do with his lack of top end speed, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But patience and square at the line of scrimmage. He probably is my favorite cornerback at the line of scrimmage. I really like what the cornerback Sidney Jones from Washington does with his ability to jam, but he can even get off balance. But with Quincy Wilson, I just love the calmness that he exudes and displays at the line of scrimmage. If you watch him at the line of scrimmage, he gets into his stance. He's square, okay? He's not sideways here. He's not shading to the inside. He's not giving up the outside. He's here. He's square, all right? And he's patient. So the receiver comes off the line and they're doing all of this. And he's like, you done yet? No, seriously, are you done? All right, which way are we going? Like, he's not going for all of these head fakes. You see a lot of corners go for all of these shimmies and fakes, and then the receiver plants and gives them a little stick to the outside, and they start moving. They open up their hips too soon. Now the receiver's got him. He goes inside. You've already opened up your hips to the outside. He's got the easy inside access to a slant or a post or anything inside in breaking. He's already gotten beat off the line of scrimmage. Quincy Wilson isn't going for none of your shenanigans. He's here at the line of scrimmage. He's standing square, and he's waiting for you to declare where you're going, outside, inside, and then he's going to get right on your hip in a trail technique, and he's going to run with you. And when you look for the football, he's going to look for the football. It is a thing of beauty. Physicality in press and in the run game. I just told you he's square at the line of scrimmage, and he will lay hands on you. He's a very physical guy at the line of scrimmage. He uses his frame well. Love the way that he approaches the line of scrimmage and plays. And then he's a guy that will get involved in the run game. And there are some grumblings and some rumblings about this guy. If he's not good at the cornerback position, if he doesn't have enough speed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, that he's so physical in the run game that you could easily make the switch and transition to safety. I feel like the Colts drafted him to be a corner. I want to see them give him every opportunity to blossom at the cornerback position, because I like Clayton Gathers. You have Malik Hooker now. I think you've got two safeties that can get the job done. Quincy Wilson, I think, is going to be just fine at the cornerback position. He's an LLCer, a guy that will look, locate, and contest the football all day long. Love his length, love his ability to get into a receiver. And then I love his ability to stack them, to really get right on their hip and sometimes railroad them to the sidelines and then locate ball and try to make a play on the football. Anticipation, he does a really good job of anticipating routes, especially in breaking routes. I feel like he does a great job of anticipating in breaking routes, slants and dig routes and things of that nature. He's all over those routes guys want to run. And again, a lot of that stems from him at the line of scrimmage being square and patient. And then when that receiver decides to take an inside release, then he just follows them and he guesses right and anticipates that they're running an in-breaking route, and he's able to be right on top of them, knock the football away, or in certain instances, pick them off. He's got ball skills, 6 career interceptions in 3 years. So this is a guy made his fair share of plays at Florida and made up one of the better corner tandems in the nation with Jalen Tease Tabor. So this is a guy that got it done at a very high clip while at Florida. You go to his cons. Average long distance speed, you're talking about a 4.54 40 guy. Bottom line is his length makes up for the lack of long distance speed. I did see him get beat off the line of scrimmage. He's one of those guys that if he gets beat off the line of scrimmage, and he's going to have to know his limitations. He's going to have to know who he's playing against. You can't get up in the face of a receiver that's running a 4.44 40, knowing that they can just flat out run by you. He's got to pick his battles. If he's got safety help, sure, you can be aggressive, get in the face of the receiver. Maybe you press a little bit, but also bail at the same time. You'll be willing to give up something underneath, but you don't want to give up the big ball deep. So he's just got to be cognizant of that. But I think he'll be just fine, because I love the length and I love his ability to contest and be physical at the line of scrimmage. So I think he'll be able to overcome the lack of long distance speed. Transition from back pedal to sprint is a little laggy to me. He's one of these taller corners, and what you'll find with these taller corners is that their back pedal, they don't get down enough. Much like we talk about with offensive linemen that are really tall, it's hard for them to get down and bend and squat. They don't want to deal with guys that are bending at 90-degree angles around the corner. It's just hard for a 6'6" guy to bend down and push a guy around the pocket when he gets too low. Same thing with corners. When you're 6'1", you're 6'2", 6'3" as a corner, it's hard to squat and get into that position for that back pedal and stay there. And it's easy to just kind of come up And when you're high in your back pedal, it slows down that transition from back pedal to full out sprint. And sometimes I think that transition for him is a little slow. And again, for a guy not running that superior 4.43 40, like the elite corners, you can't afford to have a little bit of lagginess in your transition from back pedal to sprint. That one step that you're losing there is enough to get you beat when you're running a 4.5 4.40 like a guy like Quincy Wilson. But nonetheless, I absolutely love his game. Think he's a great addition to an Indianapolis Colts defense that could desperately use a corner just like him. In the second round, 46th overall pick, Florida cornerback Quincy Wilson, for me, is a triple. The Indianapolis Colts, to me, really did a tremendous job of fortifying that secondary with their first two selections. And really to complement what they did in the first two rounds, I love this next selection just as much as I love the previous two. In the third round, 80th overall selection, Ohio edge rusher Tarell Basham is the selection. This was one of the guys that I wanted my Washington Redskins to select. I thought this was a fabulous pick by the Indianapolis Colts. Let's talk about why. You start with his pros, outstanding size and length for the position. This guy's 6'4", 269 pounds. So you're essentially saying 6'4", 270, which is outstanding as an edge rusher in this league. 34-inch arms, so he's got vines for arms. So this is a guy that has all of the tools necessary to be an elite dynamic edge rusher in this league. Explosive off the edge. There are a couple of instances where you watch this guy and you say, he's got it. Now, can he put it all together? But he's got it. He was rushing against, I watched him against Troy, and Antonio Garcia was selected in the, I want to say, third or fourth round. I want to believe the Denver Broncos scooped him up. So you're talking about a future NFL player at left tackle gets smoked off the line by Tarell Basham. Before he could even get out of his stance, Basham was already behind him, past him, and to the quarterback. So it's that kind of explosion that you see where you say, wow, my goodness. And then I watched him against Tennessee. And you know, that's upper echelon competition. And yeah, Tennessee had a relatively young offensive line, and he went out there and baptized those boys. But nonetheless, you saw him doing some things to those Tennessee offensive linemen, and you just say, wow, this guy's very impressive. And you see the explosion off the edge. You see him go inside. The Tennessee guys just had no answer for him. He was outstanding in that football game. Sets a physical edge at 270 pounds. This guy sets a physical, I mean a physical, mean edge in the run game. So not only is he a guy that I think has the potential to be a dynamic edge rusher, but he also sets the edge in the run game. Because, you know, a lot of times with these edge rushers, you're not quite sure if they can set a physical enough edge in the run game. These guys that are 253 pounds, they can get after the quarterback, but you're not quite sure how well they're going to hold up in the run game. That's not a question for Tarell Basham. He's got a quality move Rolodex. I mean, he's got one of those Rolodexes where you can kind of go through and he can flip through and see what move he wants to use next. Now, we're going to talk about how he needs to learn how to put those moves together and come up with more of a plan. However, all the tools are there. And again, I always tell you, it's much easier to help put together a guy that has all of the necessary tools on his tool belt. It's a lot harder to get a project started and done when you don't have all the tools necessary to get the job done. This guy can give you a myriad of moves. You've got the elite edge, explosion, and speed off the edge. So that speed can then turn to power. So he does a good job of using the speed and turning it into power. He's got an amazing inside move where he starts outside, goes inside. Used that one against Tennessee. Drew a holding penalty, still got up and flushed the quarterback outside the pocket and almost got the sack. And then he's also got a beautiful spin move. I don't think he uses it enough. So this is a guy that comes complete with a number of moves that will allow him to excel at the next level if he learns how to put these moves together in succession. Plays under control with burst. Watched him in that same Tennessee game, and he did a really good job of staying at home. Tennessee was trying to get him to commit on some play action fake and some bootlegs. They were trying to get him to chase the bait down the line, and he wasn't going for it. He stayed at home, backside contained. And once he saw Joshua Dobbs keeping the football, he went and he chased him down immediately, closed that gap, got to him, slung him down on the ground. So he was outstanding, really under control, sees what's going on, and then uses his elite closing ability to get to ball carriers and get them onto the ground. He can drop into coverage. I think this is a guy that offers you a little bit of versatility to be able to drop into coverage. He's a little stiff. He's stiff. He's not a fluid enough athlete to ask him to do that on a consistent basis. But every now and again, you want to give the offense a different look. You can drop Tarell Basham into coverage and he'll be just fine. Don't ask him to do that on a consistent basis. You'll find yourself getting into trouble that way. And he's a much better pass rusher and run stopper anyway. So you don't want to use him out in coverage too often. But yes, he can in fact do that. And last but not least, gives you some versatility. He's a guy that can stick his hand in the dirt, 3-point stance, also stand up in a 2-point stance. So you're looking at a base 3-4 or a base 4-3 defensive end, or you can use him as a stand-up outside linebacker, which I think is what the Colts will ultimately elect to do with him. And again, teams play so much nickel now. You're going to be in 4-man even fronts anyhow. He'll be able to do both, and he's exceptional at both, if you ask me. So you go from his pros to all of his cons, and he needs more of a rush plan, and he also needs to refine his rush. So this is a guy that I feel like right now he's just going off of pure athleticism, pure instincts. He's not a guy that's thinking the game through. He's not going up to a tackle and saying, okay, I'm going to give you a couple of moves hard to the outside, and then I'm going to chase you inside, and then I'm going to get you leaning to the outside again. And just when you open up that gate too soon, I'm going to spin on you. He's just pulling out moves randomly. He may go up to the tackle and say, you know what? I'm just going to spin this time and see what happens. And I'd like to see him. And again, this comes with experience. And I think when coaches sit him down and say, look, man, you got to start being more psychologically sound with what you're doing. You got to have a plan and a method to your madness. He doesn't have that right now. If he acquires that, he'll be dangerous. Also, I feel like he needs to refine his rush, meaning he needs to use his hands more. He does not use his hands at all right now. He is not a master in karate, does not own a belt. He would be a white belt in karate, doesn't use his hands. He's got 34-inch arms, and I don't think he's aware of this right now as a pass rusher. He has something that guys would die for, would kill for, and he's not utilizing it to the best of his abilities. Again, that's where coaching comes into play, and they got to show this guy all of the different things that he has to unlock his full potential at the next level. And his redirect isn't optimal. That's the final con. He's one of those guys that once he gets that 270-pound frame going in one direction, not the easiest to stop it, start it, and go in a different direction again. So I watched Joshua Dobbs. He had him dead to right. Okay, I talked about him being patient and then turning on the afterburners and turning on that closing burst to get to the quarterback or the ball carrier in general. Well, he had Joshua Dobbs. He sized him up. He forced Joshua Dobbs to make a decision on read option. And he closes him after that decision. He closes on him. And Joshua Dobbs just gives him a quick shimmy. And he couldn't stop himself. And Dobbs went right past him, zoomed right into the end zone for a 12-yard touchdown, when it could have been an easy tackle for loss. Tennessee has to settle for a field goal. So he does not redirect well. And I told you, he's got tight hips. He's not a guy that is comfortable out in space and coverage. So he's a guy that has limited redirect. But nonetheless, this is a guy that I wanted my Redskins to draft. This is a guy that I think has immense potential at the next level. He needs good coaching to unlock his full potential. But in the third round, 80th overall selection, Ohio edge rusher Tarell Basham for me is another triple. I think with the upgrades that you've made in the secondary, now you're adding a guy that can get to the quarterback. All of a sudden, the Indianapolis Colts are doing it the right way defensively. If these guys pan out and turn out to be the players that I think that they can be, this Indianapolis Colts defense is going to be dangerous a lot sooner than later. You go to their next pick, 4th round, 137th overall. USC offensive lineman Zach Banner is the selection. Man, is this a big, gigantic, huge man. 6'8", 353 pounds. Wowza. Okay. Massive size and length are his first pros. To go with that 6'8" frame, he's got 35-inch arms, which is what you probably expect from a guy that's 6'8". Man, is this a mountain of a man here. So obviously you're talking about a guy that is huge with long vines for arms. He anchors well. Again, when you're 353 pounds, you better anchor well. I don't want to see a 353-pound man on skates getting bull rushed and jacked up into the quarterback. It can happen when you're 6'8", because there's a lot to really hit and get under if you're a guy coming off the ball with some explosion and you are able to get into his pads before he's able to get into you. That's where those massive arms are supposed to come into play, though, to keep these defensive guys off you and at bay. And so he does a really good job of absorbing contact, anchoring down, and not allowing them to get to the quarterback. He's a man mover in the run game, as you would expect. This is a big guy, and when he lays hands on you, when he puts paws on defensive players, he does a really good job of turning them and driving them out of the way and opening up holes in the run game. That's probably his best attribute, is what he does in the run game. This was a very stale and stagnant Colts rushing attack. Frank Gore somehow, some way, magically made it over 1,000, but barely. But don't get it twisted. This is still a very anemic Colts rushing offense. A guy like Zach Banner comes in and immediately gives you a boost in that department. Even if he's not starting and you only bring him in as an extra tackle to block, he's going to do his job in the run game. That is for certain. He sustains blocks. When he gets his hands on you, generally, you're not getting away, okay? He's one of those guys that he latches on and you're going for a ride. Saddle up, you're probably going to take a nice little ride, especially in the run game. Initial kick slide coupled with length is adequate enough in the pass game. We're going to talk about some of his deficiencies here in a second. But I think with his kick slide, he gets out of his stance for a big 6'8", 350-pound man. He gets out of his stance actually pretty smoothly, and his length makes up for the lack of quickness laterally. So even when guys kind of beat him, he's able to recover by pushing them around the pocket and allowing the quarterback to step up. Now, if you get one of these elite rushers who can dip and bend that corner, it's going to be a lot tougher for him to recover because, again, he's 6'8", he can't bend, but so far. So, again, you didn't see a lot of those elite guys at the collegiate level that knew how to finish once they beat him around the edge. So he was able to get back into the rep and win the rep ultimately by pushing them around and recovering at the last minute. He's got a nasty disposition. That's the final pro. He's one of those guys that he really wants to beat you up. He wants to dump you. I saw him dump a guy on his neck. I said, come on, that's not fair. Why are you doing that? Dumped the guy on his neck, jumped on top of him. I said, look, this isn't WWE, bro. What are you doing? All right? And he's one of those guys that I watched him in the Washington game. And it was a really nondescript play. It's not one that you should remember. But again, when you're watching film of so many guys, you notice everything. And so there's a particular play where he's blocking a guy and the whistle has already blown, but he just wants one more shot on this guy. And he pushes him and the whistle blows and he chases him another 2 yards and pushes him again. I'm like, why? And it's just because he has a nasty disposition. So, and I like that in my offensive lineman. Especially a guy of his size, you want him to be nasty and physical, and you want him to dominate the guy in front of him. And so you go from those pros to his cons. His weight has been an issue throughout his career. This guy at one point was 385 pounds. A lot of people think that eventually he's going to balloon back up in weight. So there are questions about his weight and his ability to keep that down. So we're going to see how he is able to sustain his weight at the next level. But that is an issue for him right now. He's already at 350 pounds, and he had to get down from 385 to 350. So that's something to keep an eye on. Adjusting to the speed of the game and maybe having to transition to guard, I think, could be two potential problems for Zach Banner. Here's a guy that I think elite speed will beat him around the edge, and guys that can dip that shoulder and shorten that edge, I think those are going to be the guys to really give him problems. And if he can't survive out wide as a tackle because his feet are too slow, can you kick him inside the guard? I don't know. He's 6'8", he's huge. That's going to be a problem, because it's one thing to be able to withstand a bull rush on the outside from a 257-pound edge rusher. It's another totally whole different animal inside with guys that are also 300+ pounds who are bench pressing 225, 30 times, who have no problems getting up under your 6'8" frame because you're so dang on tall and driving your ass back into the lap of the quarterback. See, you can get away with that on the outside where guys aren't as strong. You go inside with those behemoths at defensive tackle, and it's a totally different world in there. You're so tall, they can get up under your pads. It may be a hard transition for him to guard. So there's some questions about Zach Banner and what he's going to be able to provide for you at the next level if you're the Indianapolis Colts. And then finally, pass pro concerns. Obviously, I just talked about how pass pro can be a problem for him. Speed around the edge is a problem for him. If he's not able to get out of his stance and gain a lot of ground with those first couple of kicks out of his slide, that could be a hard transition for him. And again, you're going to get guys who are going to be really smart. They're going to try to beat him up with the speed, and then they're going to get him to open up his hips. And he's 6'8", 350. He's not going to be able to open his hips and then recover to the inside. So guys are going to take advantage of him. Pass pro is a big concern for a lot of people with Zach Banner, but I'm of the thought process, let this guy show you that he can't at right tackle before you decide for him that he can't. You draft him as a tackle, let him play tackle, and if he shows you he can't, then you try him as a guard. In the 4th round, 137th overall selection, USC offensive lineman Zach Banner for me is a double. A guy that we got questions about him at tackle. One thing I don't question is his ability to open up holes in the run game, something the Indianapolis Colts could desperately use. You go to your next 4th round pick, another pick that I absolutely love, a guy that I also wanted my Redskins to draft. So you knew I was in love with this Colts draft. 4th round, 143rd overall selection. South Florida running back Marlon Mack is the selection. 5'11", 213, good size for an NFL back. So you start there at size. You would love him to be 225 like Ezekiel Elliott was coming into the league, but he's 213. It is what it is. I don't know if you want to make him an every down back, but he's a guy that can definitely tote the rock for you at the next level. Athleticism, 4'5", 40, 35.5-inch vert, and a 10-4 broad look. That 4'5", 40 to me is imaginary, okay? Because I don't think that's his play speed. I think that's a farce. I think he's running a sub 4'5", 40 for sure. You turn on the tape, you tell me, you be the judge. I'm not buying 4'5", 40. He didn't run at his pro day. I think he was fine with his 4'5" because he knows he's faster than that, at least on game day. So don't buy the hype. This guy is running past 2nd and 3rd level defenders. Now, again, he played in the AAC. And maybe if that was the ACC or the Pac-12 or the SEC, maybe that would look like legit 4'5" speed. But I'm telling you, he was running past some guys. So I'm anxious to see if he can translate that speed and athleticism to the NFL level. Tremendous agility. And I'll go ahead and lump it in with the next pro. He will break dudes off. I watched him. Again, every year I have guys that are my favorite tapes to watch. A couple of years ago, I remember watching Tevin Coleman out of Indiana, who was selected by the Atlanta Falcons in the 2nd round of the 2015 NFL draft, I believe. And Tevin Coleman's tape was so fun to watch because every snap you said this could be the snap where he breaks a long run. And the same thing was with Marlon Mack. Every run felt like the one. And he would cut back, he would break dudes off. And there's a play against Central Florida where he just undresses a guy out in the flats. He gets the football, as he customarily does. He breaks it out to the outside. There's a defender that has him. He's breaking down. He's right there. And Marlon Mack gives him a little something, something. I mean, he breaks his ass off with a quick inside-outside move. And he just absolutely broke that man down like his mama just died. I mean, he broke down on both knees and started praying, and Marlon Mack went off to the races and scored about a 43-yard touchdown. I mean, he's got that kind of ability, and another one of these guys that when he's cutting, he doesn't lose any ground. He doesn't lose any speed, so he's really dangerous out in space. Home run threat is the next pro, and I can't tell you how many times I watched this guy just break off a huge run for a touchdown. All right, we're talking 69-yard touchdown, 82-yard touchdown, 44-yard touchdown. I think he led the nation, or was one of the leaders in the nation in touchdown runs of 43 yards or more. He was up there, man. This guy is a true home run threat in every sense of the word, and I think the Colts can use that in their offense. They have explosion with T.Y. Hilton and company, but they don't have it in the run game. Now they do with Marlon Mack. And he's a yakster. He's a guy that occasionally will run through arm tackles, but a lot of his yards after contact usually comes from a guy trying to get to him, getting a little piece, but he breaks him off and isn't able to get Marlon Mack down onto the turf. He's a solid pass catcher. I think he's getting better at that. I don't think he is the type of guy that you split out wide and set up a one-on-one matchup for him to win and isolate him and try to take advantage of it like you would a Matt Forte or Le'Veon Bell or one of those guys in the league, but or David Johnson. But I think he's an adequate pass catcher out of the backfield, a guy that you can throw some screens and swing routes and arrow routes to occasionally, and he can catch the football. So he has that in his arsenal, as well as you move on to his cons. First thing that you notice with him is he's an excessive bouncer. He loves to bounce everything outside if he can. Not to say that he can't run in between the tackles, but he'd much rather get outside. And you'll see when you watch him, 90% of his plays bounce to the outside. Now, a lot of that is by design. You know, they run a spread offense at South Florida with a very mobile quarterback. And so a lot of his handoffs were out of the pistol or out of the shotgun. And so he was taking a lot of routes that were taking him outside. But even the in between the tackle runs, he'd bounce it outside at the first sign of trouble. So he's the type of guy that is excessive in trying to make every run the home run. And a lot of times he won't take what's there. And so that can be a problem for him, something he may need to clean up at the next level. I think his pass pro can use a little bit of a touch up. They didn't ask him to do it a ton at South Florida because he was such an integral part of their offense, whether he was going out in a pass route or he was toting the rock as a runner. He wasn't asked to pass protect a lot. Their quarterback ran it a ton as well. So he wasn't asked to pass pro a ton, but I think he's adequate, but I think he can be better. I think he can touch that up just a tad. And this is the big elephant in the room for Marlon Mack. This is why I think he's a 4th-round pick, because if you just look at his game and what he's able to do, maybe you want him to be a little bit bigger. Maybe you're not sure if he's a true 3-down back because he's only 213 pounds. I don't subscribe to that, but you can't fumble the football 12 times in 3 years. That's a problem. He lost 5 of those fumbles. So you're talking about a guy that put the football on the turf a ton. And if you want to get into a coach's doghouse, the fastest way to do that as a running back is to put the football down on the carpet, or as a wise man once told me, to put the church's money on the floor. You want to go into the doghouse, that's the best way to do it. That's the fastest way to do it. And Marlon Mack had his fair share of fumbles throughout his career, and his team lost almost over half of his fumbles. So that's something that he definitely needs to work on. Ball security doesn't scare me for college football players because I've seen guys come to the pros with a fumbling issue and have those resolved over time. You can teach a guy how to secure the football better. What you can't teach is speed, the ability to make guys miss out in space, and the ability to hit a home run. And Marlon Mack can do that for you from the running back position in the 4th round, 143rd overall selection. South Florida running back Marlon Mack for me is a triple. This is an outstanding pick. You're talking about 4 out of the first 5 picks for these Colts in this draft being triples or higher. I thought they were outstanding with their first 5 picks in the draft. And then the final 3 picks are all guys that I think they're looking at as developmental guys as we move on to their 3rd 4th round pick, 144th overall. Albany State offensive lineman defensive lineman Grover Stewart is the selection. This is a big guy, 6'5", 335. And your GM, Chris Ballard, said, look, we want to get bigger. We want to get physical, more physical in the trenches on both sides of the football. And you saw Zach Banner and his size and his girth at 6'8", 353. Here's another massive man at 6'5", 335 in Grover Stewart. He's a big man. His size is obviously the first pro. He's got powerful hands that allow him to bull rush, which is the next pro. I think he does a phenomenal job of stacking and shedding and latching on to the running back as they come into his gap. So he's a guy that has the ability to potentially 2-gap if you need him to, because he does a really good job of containing the action in his gap and then going over to the next gap if need be by being able to stack and shed. So he does have some abilities, but I got some problems with this selection, and we're going to get to his cons now. I got one con, and you know my prerequisite for small school guys. And if you take a look at the picture, I couldn't even find a picture of him with his helmet on by himself. Everything was grainy. It was bad photos. He played at a really small school, Albany State. Hell, the picture with him with his jersey on, all of the other pictures that I found, his jersey had holes in them. Their jerseys looked like recreational jerseys that you would wear when you're 12 years old. Okay, so very small school. So that means there's one prerequisite for you to be able to score with me and resonate with me. You got one job, and that's to dominate. So Daniel Jeremiah has a saying, and I don't necessarily subscribe to it all the time, but it's the truth, okay? I'm not a guy that doesn't want to know your number, but Daniel Jeremiah says, look, I don't even want to know your number. When I'm watching a guy from a small school, I don't want to know your number. I should be able to pick you out of the 22 guys that are on the field. I should be able to pick you out because you should stick out like a sore thumb because you're supposed to be dominating. I turned on the tape and I did not see domination, and my one and only rule and prerequisite for small school guys is dominate the competition. That's how you get on the NFL radar. Now, look, I don't have access to all of this man's games. So the 2 games in particular that I was able to lay eyes on, maybe they were his worst games. Maybe those were games where he was off. Maybe he was injured in those games. I don't know the backstory. I'm just telling you, I watched the man and he did not dominate. I watched a small school guy from the MEAC last year out of South Carolina State that was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. I saw domination immediately from this man, okay? I saw domination right off the snap. I didn't see any domination from Grover Stewart. As a matter of fact, I watched 2 games, one versus West Georgia. No, not the Georgia Bulldogs, West Georgia. You're supposed to be kicking their ass. I watched him against Miles College. He was miles and miles away from the action, okay? I watched him in those 2 games against those 2 schools, and he was invisible. I saw flashes, but I didn't see a guy that was dominant. And I had a problem with that. And so, in the 4th round, 144th pick overall, Albany State defensive lineman Grover Stewart for me is a single. Now, this guy may turn out to be a stud and an animal at the next level. And the games that I watched just weren't games that were very flattering for him. But bottom line is, I want to see you dominate in every single game because you're playing against lesser competition. You're playing against West Georgia. You're playing against Miles College. You're supposed to be dominating. I didn't see domination. So he didn't have the one prerequisite that I needed. It's a single. You go to the next pick. 5th round, 158th overall selection. Temple cornerback Nate Hairston is the selection. 6 feet, 196 pounds. So that's solid size for the cornerback position. He's got solid movement skills and he's very comfortable out in space. This is another guy that was an ex-wide receiver. So you're talking about a guy that, and I love ex-receivers turn corners because they've got a knowledge and a perspective of the game that most cornerbacks don't. And so they know how offenses work. They know route combinations. So it helps them in deciphering what's going on and allows them to be able to jump some routes and recognize what's going on and maybe make some plays. So he's really comfortable, solid movement skills. He looks the part of a guy that's a fluid athlete, and you got to be a fluid athlete to be a receiver in the first place. Physicality, he plays the game hard, man. Whether it's attacking the run game, checking his man in the pass game, he just does everything on 10. His motor is extremely hot. It's always running high. I love it. Keys quarterback's eyes. Does a really good job in zone coverage of eyeballing the quarterback, which takes him to the football, allows him to make some plays. So again, he does a really good job for a guy that was an ex-wide receiver in college, spent his first 2 years at the receiver position, got limited snaps at corner in his 3rd year, and then finally saw the field in his final year at Temple. This is a guy that really made some leaps and bounds and some strides and gave himself an opportunity to be selected in the 5th round of the NFL draft. So he's a guy that has come a long way, and this is where that ex-receiver background comes into play. Understands route concepts and pattern matches. Does a really good job when he's in zone of pattern matching guys. He knows what route is coming, knows the combinations from when he played receiver. So he's seen a lot of these concepts before. So he does a really good job of matching them when they come into his zone and running with them and taking those options away from the quarterback, forcing him to have to go somewhere else. And so he did a really good job of pattern matching, recognizing route concepts, and jumping into the passing lanes and really disrupting the timing of the quarterback and receiver on particular plays. He'll tackle. He'll get in there. He'll mix it up. Despite being less than 200 pounds, this is a guy that, as an ex-receiver, you can tell sometimes he's like, hey, y'all go ahead and handle that. But if the action gets too close, he is more than willing to jump in there and see if he can't make something happen. There's upside here, man. You watch this guy and you see some qualities that you like. He does look back for the football occasionally. He does I think he's much better in zone right now than he is in man. But again, all of this is going to come with experience. The more this guy plays, the better he'll become. So the upside, and again, you know, I don't like to mention upside very often because everyone is drafted with the prospects of having upside. But when you haven't really played the position, and literally this guy came to college as a receiver and played his first 2 collegiate seasons as a receiver, he's extremely raw, folks. So there is tremendous upside here with Nate Hairston. As we go to his cons, he's raw. Lack of experience is the first thing that I could think of. I'm like, you watch this guy, and there's a particular play I'm watching him. I want to say it's against Cincinnati. And he's in zone coverage. Does a beautiful job of baiting the quarterback. Initially, he thinks it's run. It looks like a play action fake, kind of takes a couple of false steps. Then he gets back into his drop in his zone and does a really good job of seeing what the quarterback wants to do, where he wants to go. And he sags underneath the corner route. And he does a beautiful job of getting depth, getting underneath that corner route. He's right there. And instead of him taking one more step and leaping up, and he would have picked it off, he freezes under I think he just underestimated where he was in proximity to the receiver and where the ball was going. He freezes and then realizes too late. I stopped in my pursuit of the football a little too soon and didn't even jump, and it turned into a completion for the receiver. And he would have picked it off. All he had to do was one more shuffle step and go up and get the football. So he's raw. He's still learning. He's still ironing out some of those kinks that you have when you're a young football player. Long distance speed. That's something we question with Nate Hairston. I don't think he's necessarily a burner. I think he's a 4.54, 4.56 type of guy. That long distance speed is something that I think could be a problem for him down the road. But again, I think he does a really good job of staying on top of receivers. And he's just another one of those guys, know your limitations, know who you're checking, know where you need to be on the football field. And if you need to stay on top of a guy and give him some underneath stuff, by all means, but don't give up anything cheap, nothing deep. So does he have long distance speed? I'm not sure, but he's so competitive that I just like this guy. I like what he brings to the table. And finally, he will give up the underneath and face guard when beat. So just like I just said, when you know you don't have long distance speed, you are more willing to give up the underneath stuff. You will give a guy 5 or 6 yards of cushion, and you will bail at the first sight of this guy threatening that cushion, and you'll give up the underneath stuff, the stop routes and the comebacks, the speed outs. You'll give those up. Those are freebies because you're like, look, you can have all those 5 and 7 yard gains. What you won't do is give me for the 55-yard gain over the top. So you can have the easy stuff on him, and so that's something that he needs to be just a little bit more cognizant of. I got to tighten that up. Now, I'm not saying give up the big play, but you do need to be a little bit closer in proximity to these receivers and not allow these passes to be completed so easily. And then finally, when he does get beat, when a guy does get on top of him, he panics. He face guards. He doesn't look back for the football. And again, that's all a part of the game and the process of learning how to be better at the cornerback position, something that comes with experience, something that he just doesn't have a lot of at this very moment. So this is one of those picks that you're looking to develop a guy and hoping that he can help you on specials and show some things in practice and eventually end up on the field in the 5th round, 158th overall selection. Temple cornerback Nate Hairston is a double. There is some potential here. There's some upside here. I like the way he plays the game. He plays balls to the wall, plays hard. And I think he's a guy that is a quick study. And if you work with him, you may be able to get something out of Nate Hairston as a 5th round pick. And finally, your final pick in the draft, another 5th round selection, 161st overall pick, Northwestern linebacker Anthony Walker Jr. is the selection. This is a guy 6'1", 238 pounds. So that's solid size for the linebacker position. We talk all the time about 229 and 31 pounds. 38 isn't that bad, but a lot of people actually think he's too heavy now. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Hustle and effort. This guy gives maximum effort. He hustles on every snap. One of those guys that does his job and does it to the best of his abilities, which is why he was a team captain 2 straight years. A guy that was over 100 tackles, which is another pro. Over 100 tackles the last 2 seasons. Really good production. You got to be in the right place at the right time and do your job to have those kinds of numbers in consecutive years. Plays with instincts, and anytime you got over 100 tackles, you got to play with instincts. You got to be able to attack the line of scrimmage and play on the other side of the line of scrimmage. He does that. He's solid in zone coverage. I think he does a really good job of keying quarterbacks' eyes. Saw him pick off a pass versus Wisconsin in a game. Thought it was a beautiful play where all he did was drop back into his zone, got depth, read the quarterback's eyes, which took him right to the football. Quarterback never saw him, cuts in front of the pass, picks it off. Beautiful play, set his team up to score some points late in that ball game. So this is a guy that does a lot of the little things correct as we move on to his cons. Lacks true athleticism and suddenness. He's not a great athlete. He's a thumper. He's a physical guy. But he's not one of the type of guys you want in man-to-man coverage. He's not a guy that's going to necessarily go sideline to sideline. You know, if the traffic is out there and the running back's juking and trying to make cuts, here comes Anthony Walker Jr. to clean you up. But if there's a foot race to the outside and the running back has any kind of speed, he's not going to win that foot race 9 times out of 10. He needs to stack and shed better. If you're going to bulk up like he did, and there's a prevailing thought right now with Anthony Walker Jr. that he was much better in 14 and 15 when he was right around 230 pounds. This guy bulked up to 238, and if you see him, he's chiseled, okay? This guy is chiseled out of stone, but a lot of people feel like he's too tight now. He's not as loose as he was in 2015, and I would tend to agree with that. I watched him in 2015 in that Wisconsin game. I watched him against Stanford in 2015. He looked like a much different player in those games. Now, I also heard a rumor that he was injured in 2016 as well. He looked injured in a couple of the games that I watched in 2016. So he looked like he was laboring a little bit. And after some plays, I did see a grimace on his face. So there may be some validity to that. But nonetheless, he doesn't stack and shed well enough for me for a guy that bulked up to put on all that muscle. I'd love to see him and he doesn't have long arms, so he's at a disadvantage. He needs to stack and shed better. And finally, he misses some tackles. For all the tackles that he made, he's one of those guys that will miss tackles as well. So these are all things that if he wants to make this team, he's going to have to clean up. But in the 5th round, 161st pick overall, Northwestern linebacker Anthony Walker Jr. is a double. I think this guy gives you some value on specials. I think this is a guy that'll come in and provide depth, but I don't think he is necessarily a game changer or a needle mover as a potential starter in this league. I think he is a backup that gives you depth at the linebacker position. And so this concludes the Indianapolis Colts 2015 NFL draft, 2017 NFL draft. Went throwback on you. This was an excellent haul by the Colts. Love what they did with their first 5 picks. I think this is a great job by GM Chris Ballard in his first NFL draft as a GM. And I think he knocked it out of the park, frankly. And so let's tally up these scores quickly. First round, home run. Then you have 3 triples in Wilson, Basham, and Mack. You then and you get a triples bonus for that. And then you turn around and have 3 doubles with Banner, Walker Jr., and Hairston, which you get a doubles bonus for that. And then you have 1 single with Grover Stewart. And so you tally all of that up. It's 25. You divide by the number of picks, 8. It's a 3.12 triple. The score isn't indicative of how good this draft is. Grover Stewart is to blame for a lot of that with his single. But nonetheless, this is an impactful draft. And I challenge you to find another team that may have gotten as many starters out of the draft as this Indianapolis Colts team may have done. Marlon Mack is going to see the football a ton on offense. Tarell, Basham, Quincy Wilson, and Hooker will all be starters by the time week 5 or 6 rolls around. If they're not starting week 1, all 3 of them. So barring injury, they're going to get a lot of mileage out of this draft in their rookie campaign. And I think these guys are all players that can step up and help this team right away. And even Zach Banner, I think, if nothing else, will be able to come in as a tackle eligible and open up some holes in the run game in 3rd and short situations. So I think this is a phenomenal draft by GM Chris Ballard. And it doesn't surprise me that you get rid of the old dead-weighted GM, bring in a new guy, and you have the best draft you've had since 2012. Go figure. So that's going to do it for the Indianapolis Colts in their 2017 NFL draft. If it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here on the Louie T Network. Come back and join me as I continue to break down anything and nothing in the National Football League. I just got one question for you. Who's next?